Can y'all hear me well enough?
Yes.
Turn up the volume. So today I have the pleasure of essentially being your MC. I'll be announcing our speakers to celebrate. We're celebrating the opening of High Rock Ford. This has been a long time coming, since the 80s, and then since we had funding about 2 years ago. So we're very excited to be here. So speaking today, we'll have Jeff Bolins, who's the president of the MARC, Davis Montgomery, who's the district manager with Duke Energy, Jay Donaker, the mayor of Reidsville, Lindley Butler, North Carolina historian, and founding member of the MARC and the Dan River Basin Association, and Tiffany Hayworth, DARPA's executive director. So we're going to have them speak, and then following the program, we'll be doing our ribbon cutting with the Reidsville Chamber of Commerce, and we'll be doing a trail walk. The trail is about a quarter of a mile. If you don't want to do the trail walk, we are also doing Brian is doing a training in water quality monitoring. Brian's over here. So that's what today will consist of. I'd like to invite our first speaker up today, Jeff Bolins. He's the president of the MARC.
Good morning. Thank you, Jordan. It's so good to see everybody here. It's a great turnout for something like this. And of course, scheduling today was so uncertain based on the weather from the last 2 or 3 times that we tried to schedule this. We had major storms on those other dates, so it's a relief to see such great weather and such a great crowd out today. But I want to make a few comments about what this park means to the MARC, and then got a lot of people to thank. So settle in for a long list of thanks. But the properties for High Rock Ford and Troublesome Creek Ironworks were donated to the Rockingham County Historical Society in 1984 by James McClamrock. He hoped these properties would be turned into sites where people could learn about Revolutionary War history. This was something he had been working on since at least the 1970s, and there are people here who could give more details about that, but he had a vision for what could be done here, and the Historical Society recognized the value of the properties and have waited a long time for an opportunity to make Mr. McClamrock's dream into a reality. And thanks to a Duke Energy Water Resources Fund grant and a partnership with the Dan River Basin Association, we were finally allowed to see the dream come true here at High Rock Ford, and there's still work to be done at the Troublesome Creek Ironworks property. And of course, in the meantime, the Museum of the Historical Society of Rockingham County has morphed into the Museum and Archives of Rockingham County. And at the MARC, we preserve and share Rockingham County's history, culture, and natural resources. Our historic complex consists of the Wright Tavern, which provides a glimpse of life in Rockingham County in the 19th century, and the History Museum, ranging in subject from the county's natural history to modern transportation and enterprise. We want to tell the story of Rockingham County, and this park helps to tell that story in immeasurable ways. Now, like I said, we have lots of people to be thankful to for the project here. First of all, I want to thank the Duke Energy Water Resources Fund for major financial support, without which this project would not have been possible. We appreciate their vision and support in making our local waterways accessible so the public can enjoy our beautiful rivers. I want to thank the Reidsville Area Foundation for their support of Pathways 2.0. That's an initiative to advance outdoor recreation in Rockingham County. Thank Jordan Rossi, our own Jordan Rossi, who is the executive director of MARC, for her resource development and graphic design work. Our own Fletcher Waynick, who is the MARC operations manager and a board member for DARPA. He performed multiple sites visits as the project was being planned. He oversaw fence installation, and including figuring out what kind of fence we needed, and overall site management as this project continued. I want to thank Jenny Edwards. She's the Dan River Basin Association project manager, and she helped very much with day-to-day types of things here and resource development as well. And I worked with Jenny on other projects, and can't imagine, if you need somebody to get something done, Jenny's the person to go to. Lots of energy, lots of ideas, and appreciate very much what she does here and all over the county. Want to thank Brian Williams with the Dan River Basin Association for river access design and installation, assistance in site design, kiosk design and installation, map design, and bench installations. We want to thank Mark Bishoprick of Three Rivers Outfitters for multiple site visits and consultations. We want to thank Bob Carter and Dr. Lindley Butler for their site consultations and historic interpretation. Tony McGee of Round Rock Design for multiple site visits to assist in trail design and later in trail construction. Lowe's Home Improvement of Medan for construction of the benches and the kiosk. Ben Curry, Rockingham County Code Enforcement for site cleanup with volunteers. Actually, more than a dozen volunteers participated in the site cleanup, and I want to give a special recognition to Kelly Niederhauser for adopting the trail. I want to recognize Merritt Pitbull Foundation for trail maintenance and cleanup. Lou Belitsky of Anglin Earthwork for a reduced rate for parking lot design and construction. Frank Garcia of Garcia Fencing for fence installation. T. and Lindley Butler for donation of wood fence that you see here. Brian Baker and Gil Johnson of Alamance County Parks and Recreation for a site visit and for welcoming High Rock Park into the Hall River Paddle Trail. Now, I hope you'll take time to walk the trail. As Jordan mentioned earlier, you'll have that opportunity this morning. And we want you to see what these people and organizations have accomplished for the county. Learn more about our county's role in the circumstances of our nation's birth, and then go and bring somebody else back here to check it out. So thank you again, and enjoy your time this morning.
Thank you for handling that long list of thank yous. There are so many people that made this project possible. And with that, I would like to invite Davis Montgomery to join us. He's the regional manager at Duke Energy. And Duke Energy gave us the Waters Resource Grant that started this all.
Well, thank you.
Well, good morning, everybody. Thank you very much for letting me be here with you. I'm really grateful for the museum and the others that kind of made this project possible. And I was talking to a few of you earlier, and I'll tell you why. I live in Elon, but I work in Rockingham County and a few others. And I've been up and down this road probably 6 dozen times and never knew this site was here. I'm always captivated by the plantation up the road and the scenic beauty and everything that's going on. And I'm blowing by here every single day or every so many times and never knew it was here. So really grateful for folks that know where these sites are, bring attention to them, and can find the resources to bring it to the public's attention so everybody can enjoy it. So thank you very much for that. When I think about Rockingham County, I think about the tremendous, and I may not use the right word, Tiffany, the tremendous, Brian, ecotourism opportunities that you have. When people think about Rockingham County or they talk about a visit that they've made to Rockingham County, what is it that it almost always captures them? Or what is it that's foremost in their mind? It's the scenic beauty, it's the rivers, it's the hills, it's the fields, it's all those things that they don't see in downtown Greensboro or Charlotte or Raleigh, and heaven forbid they'd like to see a lot more of it, so that's why they come here. So you've got these just wonderful opportunities. When we think back over the last 4 or 5 years and think about the partnerships we've had, I mean with the museum of course, with Rockingham County itself, with several of the municipalities, with DARVA, the RCC. I mean, you folks have brought online in the last 4 or 5 years to the Rockingham County Community Foundation. I think we did, I don't know, Jenny, it was like 2 dozen, 3 dozen projects through the Rockingham County. Yeah.
We were really busy then.
It was. When you talk about Jenny having plenty of ideas, it's like drinking from a fire hose talking to Jenny. You got to go get a cup of coffee and come back. I mean, it's one of those things you're going to be there for a while. But think about what you brought online. Think about what you've made available to other people to see, to enjoy, that they never knew that was there. And I bet you've increased that inventory by 4-fold or 5-fold over the last couple of years. So, you know, forgive the corporate plug. I'm almost required to do it, but I'm very grateful that Duke Energy, my company, does these sort of things. And I'm very grateful when they can do it in my territory. So that's where I want them to spend their money. So if you have other opportunities, absolutely. I'm sure Jenny will be letting me know. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Davis. I'd like to invite Jay Donaker, the mayor of Reidsville, to join us now.
Thank you, Jordan. Thank you very much. We now have all 4 rivers in Rockingham County have a canoe landing. We haven't been able to say that till just today. We now are connected to the Hall River paddleway. Again, we weren't able to say that until today. One thing I want to pass on to you is one of our visions at the City of Reidsville is for our citizens to be connected to the Mountain to the Sea Trail. This is just one piece of the puzzle. We're going to have a blue way that goes through Lake Reidsville that we're in the process of working on right now, thanks to the efforts of Donna Setliff and a number of other people. The City of Reidsville wants to team up with anybody that wants to make our quality of life better in Rockingham County and the Reidsville area. And that's why I'm here. I'm here to express the wishes of our current council, and I'm sure our future councils, that if there's more collaborative efforts that Team Reidsville can take part in, please don't hesitate to ask us. Our interest doesn't stop at our city boundaries. We want to have what's best for our citizens to enjoy the entire county. And for that, thank the MARC and Duke Power for really stimulating us to get our Hall River to have a access way. But again, it's part of a larger scheme, so we have more paddleways within the county, and eventually we are going to get connected to the Mountain to the Sea Trail. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jay. And now I would like to invite Lindley Butler. He is a North Carolina historian. He's been such an important member at the MARC and in the Dan River Basin Association. He's repping both.
Yeah, gotta have that hat and this jacket. Represent both organizations. This is a dream that James McClamrock had back in the early 70s, and he purchased this property and the ironworks. He was not a historian, he was an attorney, but he loved history, and he loved the Revolutionary War history of this area. Of all the wars this country's been in, the Revolution is not controversial, because the Revolution created this country. We wouldn't exist if what happened here, which is a small piece of it, hadn't happened. And so we have 2 places in Rockingham County that take us back to the Revolution, here and at Ironworks. They were staging areas for Greene's army. Nathaniel Greene had become the commander, and you're going to learn about all of that from the interpretive signs. Greene had taken command in late 1780. It had been a disaster in the South. The war was stalemated in the North. The British couldn't defeat Washington, and Washington couldn't defeat them. They were tied down around New York City. And so the British decided to move south, the soft underbelly, they thought. More loyalists here. Not much had happened since the early part of the war. There'd been some activity in 75, 76, but not since then. And so they came south. They conquered Georgia and added it back to and reestablished royal government in Georgia. Moved to South Carolina, and Charleston fell, and that was the worst defeat that we suffered. General Lincoln surrendered about 5,000 troops there to the British. And then they moved into South Carolina, and they ran into what we now call guerrilla warfare. They called it partisan warfare, and that broke out all over upcountry South Carolina. So the British, yes, they occupied South Carolina, but they were in trouble. They decided then to go to North Carolina. They were just going to come right on up through the South. And in December Greene had taken command of an army that had been shattered at Camden, which was one of the worst tactical defeats in the South, back in the summer of 1780. What he found in Charlotte, which was just a crossroads then, was about less than 1,000 men, hungry, ill-clothed, ill-sheltered, almost like a forgotten remnant of an army that had existed back at that past summer. Greene had been Washington's right-hand man in the North, his best general. He'd also been quartermaster for about a year and a half. Didn't like that job. He wanted to be in the field commanding troops. But what he learned being quartermaster was how to supply and how to organize a campaign. And so he was a perfect man for it. By the way, I might add, Congress had appointed all the generals who had failed up to that point. And they finally asked George Washington, well, who would you recommend? And he said, Greene. I told you that a year ago, you know. And so anyway, the political generals were gone, and now we had a real general who started out life as a Quaker, and you know that Quakers are pacifists, so that just tells you a little bit of the journey he had to make personally during the war. He decided that this country was worth, and what it stood for was worth changing his views. But he was always very sparing of the use of his troops. He was not a general who would go in and waste human life. And you're going to see that in this campaign. Cornwallis came after him, and they sent reinforcements from Virginia right away to Greene. And Cornwallis moved into North Carolina, and Greene began what was called the retreat to the Dan River across North Carolina, and we're talking about January and February. They did not fight in the north in the winter. That's what Valley Forge is all about. They would go into winter quarters in the north, both the British and the Americans. Washington was in Valley Forge twice, and then in northern New Jersey most of that time. But in the South, they did campaign, and this was a winter campaign. But folks, it was colder then, and snow and sleet and freezing rain and high rivers. We haven't seen this access here. Oh, how long ago? All spring it's been underwater. And so there are very few bridges. There was no bridge here, it was a ford. They had to wade the streams and rivers, and we're talking about the Yadkin and Catawba. We're not just talking about a small stream like the Haw. We're talking about major rivers. Greene had sent his engineers to find the fords, to collect boats, locate the mills, because they used the mills to grind grain and corn with troops, and the roads, the best roads. So he had all of that already figured out in on paper and maps of how to get across North Carolina. Cornwallis just sort of came pell-mell after him, trying to catch him. So from January into February, they're crossing from roughly Charlotte toward Danville and what we call South Boston today. That's where they cross the river in Virginia, Halifax County, Virginia. And so it's a diagonal from that Charlotte area on across the state. Roughly Interstate 85, but of course they didn't have that. Now, the other thing you need to know about streams is we have a lot of causeways going to bridges. They usually had to wade through wetlands, swamps, to get to the stream. And I don't think any of us would want to do that in January. A lot of troops didn't have shoes. They had just rags wrapped around their feet. They had about one meal a day. They didn't have time to cook. They were, it was usually a cold meal. Probably they'd cooked hoe cake or something like that, a corn cake. They might have a little bacon or a little fat to go with it. That's about it. Some of them had blankets, but they were sharing sometimes 2 or 3 men, one blanket, no tent. And that's what's going on with our Army for several weeks in that time of year. Greene made it across the Dan River at South Boston area about the 13th of February. 3 days later, the British came, saw they'd made it, and so they dropped back to what we call Hillsborough, and they did then too, North Carolina. And they raised the British flag and said, North Carolina's liberated, joined the Crown again. 3 days later, Greene had sent his cavalry back across the Dan River, and a week after that, the Army crossed back into North Carolina and moved in this direction. So they're moving sort of southwest, diagonally across the top of the state, and end up here, Ironworks and Boyd's Mill on Reedy Fork Creek. 3 different locations to concentrate troops. They send out word for the militia to show up. Now the militia was the forerunner of the National Guard. Had nothing to do with what people call militias today. It was a civilian group. They're called up for emergencies. You might be called up to serve 2 or 3 days. You might be called up to serve 6 months, or it might be a year. You never knew. And you were paid for active duty and then sent home when the emergency was over. But of course these fellows were called in and they were serving quite a time. The Guilford militia, and we were Guilford County then, the Guilford militia showed up with about 200 men under the command of Colonel James Martin, who was governor, the governor's brother, Alexander Martin, also from this area. There were roughly 4,000 men camped in these woods and back on this plateau. They want the river, the British are south, they want the river between them and the Army. The stuff's coming in from Virginia all around, cattle are being driven in, hogs are being driven in, so you've got fresh meat, and then they've got the mill to grind the corn. I want to mention that neither army burned mills, because they never knew when they might be back here. Both the British and Americans used the same mill, and they would move on, and if they burned it, 2 days later they might be back, and how are you going to grind your grain? So the mills were usually left intact, even though they knew the enemy might be using it soon after. Okay, you'll see high ground on this side of the river. Just look at the terrain and think in military terms. We don't think there was any fortification here. For one thing, you can see all the rock around here. There's rock right under the surface all across here. You're not going to be able to dig any trenches or make any fortifications to amount to anything. The ford was just on the other side of the bridge. And so the road goes toward Greensboro, as it does today. This is a good position over here. And we do have, of the 20 acres, we have a fairly good sized area on this side. And then we'll go up on the bluff when we take the hike, and you'll see this a fairly high bluff. And then the tents, and they did have tents by this time, shelters, brush shelters, log shelters probably, which they could put together pretty quickly. All that's back toward High Rock House and up High Rock Road. It's sort of like a plateau. And then you got all that cattle and all the rest of the stuff all over, the horses, the cavalry. The 2 important cavalry units, Light Horse Harry Lee was probably our most brilliant cavalry commander, but William Washington, a cousin of George Washington, was the other cavalry commander, and they were both with this army. One of the local stories I ran into years ago was on some property on the other side of Wentworth. The family tradition was that George Washington had camped by their spring overnight and had, I don't know how long he stayed, but when I heard it, I said, no, it's not George. I don't usually say that to the person who's telling me the story. I'm saying that in my mind. It's William Washington. That's the Washington that's there. And we ran into a journal kept by Abraham Phillips, who was a surveyor who actually cut us off from Guilford County, created Rockingham. Abraham Phillips was a scout with William Washington in this area, in Rockingham County. And I am positive that it's, he doesn't say actually where they're camping, but I'm sure it's William Washington. And the story became, George did come here and eat breakfast at the ironworks after the war. He was touring the South. The president was wandering all over the country in 1792 just to see the country. And he also wanted to see the revolutionary sites that he hadn't seen before. And so he got the President of the United States in a coach with probably 4 horses. I think he had a servant, a driver, no Secret Service, and he's staying with people. He just knocked on the door and could you put us up for the night? And well, who is it? Oh, geez, oh yeah, I'm sure. I'm glad to have you. Slept in all. That's why he slept in all these places all over the United States. He did a northern trip and he did a southern trip while he was president. Okay, my wife's looking at her watch. I did want to show you. This is called the Guilford Courthouse flag. It actually exists. The North Carolina Museum has the original. It's much, much larger than this. There's a little bit of controversy about it, but it was authenticated to me because you see the colors a little different. There are a number of revolutionary flags that are sort of like this. The colors aren't exactly the way we've got it. They had heard that there's stars and stripes, and it's red, white, and blue, which we got from the British flag. But somehow it didn't get down at which are the colors, you know, what are the stripes, this, that, or the other. And I think that authenticates it. You're not going to see a flag like this 10 years after the country's founded. You're going to see it at the beginning when they didn't quite know how to put it together. It also may be that they had more white than they had blue or so, I don't know. But anyway, this flag was here because the militia was here, and it was at Guilford Courthouse. And it's fairly familiar to us because you see it over at Guilford Courthouse. I guess that's about it. Let me just say this. They left here. This was a major rendezvous area. Greene was in the saddle. He was all over the place. He has orders written down Reedy Creek. The next night he's here. The next night he's over at Ironworks. He's just moving all over the area, energizing everybody. Great leader. They left here on the 12th of March, 2 days to move to Guilford Courthouse, which is a little further than from the Ironworks. And the battle was on the 15th. They arrived at Guilford Courthouse on the 14th. The battle was on the 15th. And then they retreated back to the Ironworks, which was closer than this area, and spent several days. Greene had no idea what Cornwallis was going to do. He might have followed him, but Cornwallis's army, although they won the battle, Greene retreated, Cornwallis's army was shattered. He had 2,000 men, Greene had 4,000, but about half of them went home the day of the battle. There's a casualty report that Greene wrote up. It's like so many wounded, so many killed, 800 missing, and you get the picture. Militia were not trained. and it's sort of tough to face trained troops. We did have Continentals. Half the Army was Continentals. They were trained. So the militia had left, but the Continentals were still there. Cornwallis lost 25% of his army at Guilford Courthouse. 40% of the officers were killed or wounded of the British Army. He couldn't follow Greene, but Greene didn't know that. They did dig some trenches over there, but they didn't know what was going to happen. And so Cornwallis went south, back, and ended up at Wilmington. He'd conquered North Carolina, but he ended up at Wilmington. Okay, Jenny's even after me now. All right. What's next?
Thank you, Lindley.
Yeah. Stay tuned for the rest of the
story. This is Tiffany Hayworth, the Executive Director of the Dan River Basin Association.
Who won, Lindley?
What a precious gift we have here in Lindley. What a great job. We're going to charge donations to DARPA to spend an afternoon with Lindley. Thank you all for coming out. DARPA is super excited to open up this trail and work in partnership with the MARC. We've almost doubled the amount of trails in Rockingham County in the past 4 years. And we're working across our 3,300 square mile region in 16 counties in North Carolina and Virginia to continue to make outdoor recreation a free and healthy way for people to get outdoors and mind, body, spirit, and enjoy nature. So thank you to our municipal partnerships, and enjoy.
Thanks, Tiffany. We're going to go ahead and get the ribbon cutting set up now. And then as a reminder, after we do that, we are going to hike, and you can ask Lindley Butler any history questions. Bob Carter is also here. He's Rockingham County's historian. He can ask, he's the expert on the mill here. So as we are going on our hikes, find them and talk to them. And Brian is going to be doing water quality testing training. So that's what will be happening after we set up our ribbon cutting.
Good morning, I'm Diane Sawyer with the Reidsville Chamber. We're just going to organize a little picture here, and then we'll cut the ribbon, and then you guys will be free to walk the trail. So we're going to move this. Okay. I can have all of the folks from DARPA come, and Davis and Mayor Donaker. You guys will come and join me right here. Who's going to be cutting this? Do you want the mayor to do it, or do you want somebody from the organization to do it?
Davis, do you want to cut the ribbon?
Alright, so Davis, I'm going to sit you in the center, and then that's how we're going to go from there. You guys, yeah, perfect. And tell you what, I'm going to try to, can we leave this kind of in between some shoulders maybe, so we can get that a little bit? So if you want to stand a little perfect right there. Perfect right there.
Where's Bob? Bob!
Well, I was going to take, it's a long one, so I was going to take it around a little bit. So I was trying to figure out, let's put you on this side there. Okay. And then we could have all the rest of you folks. Come on, everybody. Brian? Yeah, Brian, and we'll get pictures, Brian. We'll upload them.
It's my job. It's my job.
It's okay. We'll take care of it.
Oh my goodness.
All right, so that way we can see the trail too.
He's here.
All right, so
Oh, there he is. I had a head in the way. And I couldn't see.
those of you that do with the nettle, we have a couple of tricks, but for those of you that don't, so we're going to see how long we can stretch this. Alright, so we're going to fake it till you make it. So you put the bow in front, and then, oh good, Jay's on the other end, so this is good. So it's got to be flat. You've got to get it back in the scissors when we actually get there, and you got to do it quick, and this has to be tight. So y'all are going to play tug of war. So we're going to take a couple pictures before we actually cut the ribbon. So if you'll just pretend like you're going to cut the ribbon, and if everybody will direct, yeah. So we do the squeeze in a little bit more, like we love each other, a little more on this end. y'all will space in a little bit. Y'all maybe come to the, yep. How much more do we need, Kayla? You got it?
Yes, I've got everybody
Perfect.
now.
So if you guys will direct your attention to here, and we're going to take a couple pictures.
You ready for me to
All right, everybody looking, smiling. All right, ready when you are.
Okay, all right. So on 3.
For real?
1, 2, 3. Alright, so Jordan, you
It's all about being effective.
I saw it yesterday. I did.
Our outfall set the link down
Let's read that one. That came.
Amazing. Absolutely.
Bill, how are you? Good to see you.
And I
Over there with his friends.
Bob, I put that side of
Hey everybody, thanks for tuning in. We're really excited to be here with the Dan River Basin Association and the MARC at the High Rock Forward site. We're thankful to Duke Energy for all their work that they're doing to help us grow things. As the mayor said, we are just happy to have things for our citizens of Reidsville to enjoy, not just within inside the city limits, but across the county. And this is a great addition for Rockingham County. So thanks for tuning in on this Saturday, and we'll see you guys soon.